Hello, I'm Claire Smith and welcome to my channel. So today's video is all about Goldfield and Banks fragrances. I've bought one of their sample sets and I've also bought the additional fragrances that aren't in that sample set so I can discuss all of their fragrance range in this video. So if you haven't seen me before, I'm Claire Smith. I make videos all about perfume, perfume science, perfume history, perfume psychology, and I also just do some strict perfume reviews just like this one and also fun perfume tags. So if that kind of thing interests you and you haven't already done so, then please do consider subscribing and please also like this video if you do like this kind of content. So in this video, I'm going to be ranking those fragrances I review and just so that you can see my personal preference. But of course you may like different ones to me. But I'm just going to try and fully describe these fragrances to you so you can make up your own minds about which ones you might want to try if you haven't already tried these. If you have already tried these, then please let me know what's your favourite down below because I'd be just really interested to know what the consensus is, which ones are the popular ones. So Goldfield and Banks are a company that began back in 2016 and they have 15 fragrances that are on the market currently. There is one extra fragrance that is a Harrods exclusive fragrance that I won't be discussing in this video because I couldn't get my hands on it. But from those 15 fragrances, the idea behind the brand really is that it's supposed to evoke the sights and the colours that you would experience visiting the Australian landscape. So Goldfield and Banks do have a range of price points and a range of sizes. So the fragrances do vary in price quite significantly depending upon whether you're choosing an extrait fragrance or whether you're choosing an eau de parfum. The fragrances mainly come in a 10ml travel spray and a 100ml bottle size, although quite a number of the fragrances are also available in 50ml sizes. So the Discovery set that I bought with 10 fragrances in retails for £44, and the individual fragrance samples are available on the website for around £6 each. So I'm going to kick off this video with the fragrances that are within the Discovery set and then I'll move on to the fragrances that aren't in the Discovery set, and they're generally the more modern releases. So the first fragrance is called Ingenious Ginger and this one is one of their best sellers. So this overall is a creamy, soft citrusy ginger with a woodiness in the dry down and it's very musky overall. So this fragrance begins with a really soft ginger and citrus. It's bright, but it's not sharp, and I think that's a really nice touch here. As this begins to dry down, it gets ever more creamy, and in the mid of the fragrance is kind of a fizzy stage where it smells a little bit like a softened ginger ale. As it dries down further, it becomes less gingery, less citrusy, although it is still there towards the end of the fragrance, and it becomes more woody overall and also very musky. It definitely has a bit of a texture to it, this one. This fragrance also feels slightly aquatic in a way to me, and I think there's something about this that isn't personally for me, this one. So I think because of that kind of slight aquatic feel and also because of the synthetic woods here and also because of the ambroxan, this isn't one for me, but it might be for you if you're not bothered by those kinds of notes in fragrances. So yeah, I can see why this one's distinctive and I do think this is a good fragrance overall. I love the opening of it. I don't think this one's particularly for me. So that's Ingenious Ginger. So the next fragrance is called Bohemian Lime, and Bohemian Lime is based on the idea of evoking Byron Bay in Australia. It was released in 2020 and this fragrance is really a blue feeling, aquatic, citrusy, aromatic, woody fragrance. So this opens with a really soft and yellowy green feeling lime. It's a very delicate, not a sharp lime, quite rounded and quite soft. And also there's a little bit of coriander. It's very, very mild and very gentle overall, but that really is present in the beginning of the fragrance and fades later on into the dry down. Also in the beginning there's a woodiness and that really grows throughout the fragrance. The fragrance does turn into a less bright citrus, something that's very much more woody, and there is the kind of same synthetic woods and ambroxan base as is in Ingenious Ginger. They do have some parallels in how they smell in the dry down. This one I absolutely loved, again, the opening. The opening was beautiful, but as soon as that woodiness and the synthetic woods and the ambroxan came in, this was less for me, and it ended up smelling like a men's shower gel to me. As much as this fragrance wasn't for me, I do think I would enjoy smelling this on somebody else. It smelled quite business-like in a way. I can kind of imagine somebody dressed in a business suit wearing this one. It's one of those very clean-feeling blue kind of fragrances. I think if you're looking for something that smells along the lines of Creed Aventus, but is more line based, this one really could be for you. I think this fragrance, it was really long lasting as well. It really was quite punchy, had a good projection. So that's Bohemian line. Next up is Sunset Hour, which I think is one of their first hit fragrances. So Sunset Hour is a fruity, gourmand, sweet, woody musk. So this is fruity, bright and sparkly to begin with, and really the raspberry is the thing that stands out the most, but that's really part of just this overall red, tropical, juicy, sweet, fruity feel of the fragrance. Really, as this dries down further, it becomes creamier and it becomes muskier and also much more powdery and woody. The powder is really what stands out overall. The texture completely changes from something that's smoother to something that's more powdery. The texture of this fragrance actually makes me think a lot of the texture of cranberry juice, that kind of texture, but it's maybe slightly more powdery than cranberry juice. Not the smell of cranberry juice, for sure. The woodiness here makes me think of a fruity wood, so something like rosewood. Rather than anything sort of, more cedary or something warmer, it's more of a fruity wood. I found this fragrance to be quite sweet, but I did really like the texture and I like that sort of sweet, fruity, tropical feel overall. I think if you really like fragrances like Jimmy Choo Blossom, like Emporio Armani's Because It's You, you might really like this one. I think the thing that makes it distinct and really stand out from those kind of fruity fragrances is the fact that it does have that texture, and the texture is very distinctive here. I think the woodiness is really nice as well and just elevates this fragrance a little bit above those other fragrances. This one was really long lasting on me. It wasn't a beast, but it wasn't a quiet one either. So that's Sunset Hour. So the next fragrance is called Pacific Rock Moss, and this is an aquatic fougere fragrance. So it opens with a really nice soft, lemony, yellowy citrus. It's really bright and sunny feeling, feels really summery. But then very quickly you get a kind of an aquatic feel coming into this, and it really makes me think of a blue ocean, a really sort of azure blue sea. And really the silveriness, I think, in this fragrance comes from some herbal notes. So when I smell this close up, I kind of get the feeling of sort of something mentholy, and there's a coolness as I kind of breathe in. Even though the herbal notes are quite subtle, I think they dramatically change how this fragrance smells after the initial few seconds. So this is a citrusy, aromatic, aquatic feeling, musky fragrance. It's quite dry, sweet and musky overall. This one I really enjoyed the beginning of, but I found it to be incredibly quiet on me after just a few minutes. I can't believe that this fragrance has as poor a longevity as it does seem to have on my skin. I feel like I must be anosmic to some of the later elements of this fragrance. Maybe there are some synthetics in this that I just can't smell. But yeah, I found this one a bit disappointing longevity-wise on me at least. I know this one is popular though, and considering this is an aquatic fragrance, I actually didn't mind this one. Probably because it was so quiet. So that's Pacific Rock Moss. So the next fragrance is called Southern Bloom, and this one's from 2018, and this is a really rich, tropical, fruity, floral fragrance. Really, really solar feeling, this one. So this fragrance opens with some ylang ylang and also some jasmine, and the ylang ylang is the thing that really dominates the opening. It does smell very, very petally, this. You can really smell the texture of the flowers. There's also a creamy coconut and also a syrupy, dark fruitiness. Later on, there's a bit of a light herbal fruitiness going on, and the herbalness really comes off again like something along the lines of a very light menthol feeling. I think that's something that's a common theme in a lot of Goldfield and Banks fragrances, that sort of herbal edge to fragrances, but it's really not intrusive in this one. The final dry down of this fragrance is a little bit powdery, but still with that fruitiness and still very definitely with the florals, so especially the ylang ylang, the creamy coconut and the menthol musk. I really like this one. I thought it was really stunning, and I think the reason I like this one quite so much is because I absolutely love Velvet Orchid, and this fragrance really has a feeling of Velvet Orchid. I think if you took Velvet Orchid and switched out the bulb flowers with ylang ylang and jasmine, then you would have this fragrance essentially. It has the same kind of texture to it. I think Velvet Orchid has a bit more of a richness. It has a few more layers, but I think if you're looking for something more tropical feeling as opposed to how Velvet Orchid feels, then I think this fragrance could be really a love for you. I think this fragrance just smells like a really sunny version of Velvet Orchid. So that's Southern Bloom. So the next fragrance is called White Sandalwood, and this one I totally wasn't expecting how it smelled from the name. So this is actually a rose fragrance, and really this opens with something that I can only describe as smelling like a powdery white chocolate. It's incredibly sweet and almost a little bit overpowering. It's slightly powdery, but it's more creamy, and it actually makes me think of floral oils. So when you think of the smells of things like Immortelle, those kinds of yellow, honeyed kind of smells in florals. Also, it makes me think of more sort of nectary, sweet smells as well. After a few minutes, this turns into an aromatic cough syrup to me. The rose is very prominent, and the rose here is more of the Rose Otto kind of rose. So the really expensive smelling rose, but it's perhaps the rose that I don't love, especially in this context. So to me, the rose here comes off as something like Turkish Delight, but it's not like the delicious kind of Turkish Delight kind of rose that I absolutely love. This is more to me like you're eating a piece of Turkish Delight, but also at the same time drinking some cough syrup or eating a cough sweet. It's just not pleasant for me. I can really feel the influence of the herbal notes here, and it does come off as quite medicinal, this fragrance. Even though sandalwood's listed, I would never have picked out sandalwood in this fragrance. To me, sandalwood, really the most associated things that I have with sandalwood are that kind of milky feeling that you get with sandalwood, and I don't really sense that here. This fragrance is creamy, but I think maybe the sandalwood's more contributing to the powdery aspects of this fragrance. I think this one gets points for originality, it gets points for lasting power, it gets points for strength for sure, but this just really wasn't for me, and I can't see this one being a love for a lot of people, but I'm sure it's got an audience because it is very unusual, and I think it's definitely something you have to sample to know which way you're going to go on. So that's White Sandalwood. So the next fragrance is called Velvet Splendour, and this fragrance really made me think of Chanel fragrances when I first smelt it. It made me very specifically think of cocoa in the beginning of this fragrance, although I feel like this is quite a more modern, more approachable version of cocoa. So this opens with a very soapy feeling orange blossom and also jasmine. The jasmine's quite heavy here, and there's also a slight aldehydic feel to this as well. The aldehydes and florals make this feel quite bright, and actually as this starts to dry down, it becomes more yellow feeling. So initially I felt like the yellowness was coming from some tropical florals, maybe something like ylang ylang, but then later on it turned quite powdery and it smelt more like a mimosa. The dry down really reminded me more of number 5, but I would say it's not as close to number 5 in the dry down as it is close to cocoa in the opening of the fragrance, even though it's not the same as either of those fragrances. This is a relatively soapy, powdery, creamy, tropical feeling white floral fragrance. And the herbal aspect of this really fades into the dry down. It turns into something that smells more like a dry coconut soap. Coconut isn't actually listed in this fragrance, so I'm assuming what I'm actually picking up is probably the sandalwood, but sandalwood just sometimes smells like coconut to me. This is sweet, this is warm, it's relatively powdery, relatively creamy, and it also has those kind of vintage nods to those other fragrances. But it is also bright feeling, solar. I quite like this fragrance, but I can see this fragrance having hugely split opinions because I know that a lot of people do struggle with that kind of Chanel type DNA to fragrances. I think if you do love those Chanel fragrances, you'll probably just still want to buy those Chanel fragrances. Although this is kind of a modern, more tropical twist on those kinds of Chanel fragrances. So this one is Velvet Splendour. So the next fragrance is called Wood Infusion, and this one is a really soft, citrusy, orangey citrus, kind of powdery, aromatic lavender, a really soft, fluffy feeling lavender. It's got kind of a fuzzy warmth to it, this fragrance. It's gently woody, but it's also got this creamy, golden, oody feeling to it in the back of the fragrance, and also a powderiness. Really, if I smell this close up, it makes me think a lot of Johnson's baby shampoo. It's that kind of smell. I do think there's some synthetic woods here, but I think they're generally quite gentle. Maybe some very gentle dose of Isoe Super, or maybe even a very mild dose of something like amberwood, but it's really not something that bothers me too much. I actually really like this one. I like the sort of the fluffiness of it and the powderiness of it, as well as the woodiness of it. And I think this one was actually quite close to skin. It really wasn't a beast, but it did have good longevity. So that's Wood Infusion. So next up is one called Desert Rosewood, and this one again really surprised me. I really like this one. So this is a dry, woody, ambery, aromatic vanilla fragrance. This fragrance really makes me think of being next to a campfire outside at night, something where your skin's being reflected with a glowy warmth. The cardamom is really gentle in the opening, but that really gives it a nice dryness and really sets off the tone of the rest of the fragrance. It's sweet and it's powdery, but it also has this kind of feeling of the cork in some white wine. Got that kind of woodiness to it. It's got a lovely warmth to it, this one, and it just feels soft and autumnal. There's a slight leatheriness to this, but it's very, very slight. It just really makes me think of autumn with those kind of ambery touches to this fragrance and that really lovely vanilla. This fragrance has really good longevity and, it's quite close to skin after a few hours, but it does have good projection in the start. This is really simple, this fragrance, but it just really works, and I think this is definitely one of my favourites of the bunch. So that's Desert Rosewood. The next fragrance is called Blue Cypress, and this is a dark green-blue aromatic fragrance. It's slightly aquatic feeling, even oceanic feeling. It's a very ocean fresh fragrance, and the lavender here is not warm, powdery and soft. It's really fresh and aromatic smelling. This definitely has a bit of a texture to it. The texture is almost like iris in the background of the fragrance, although I don't think it is iris, but it definitely has that kind of powdery, like musky texture to it. And the patchouli here is really important. The patchouli is not woody, it's more of a green, almost minty feeling patchouli, which really adds to the blue-green feel of this fragrance, the oceanic kind of fresh feel of this fragrance. Not my favourite, this one. Blue Cypress is probably not one for me, but I think if you're looking for a very fresh feeling oceanic fragrance, this is actually pretty good, I think. So that's Blue Cypress. So the next fragrance is called Island Lush, and I really didn't understand the name of this one because I was expecting something fruity, something tropical, perhaps something greener, and this is not that at all. So this is a powdery sandalwood fragrance. It's an irisy sandalwood fragrance really in the dry down, and there's also a lot of benzoin here. It's kind of adding to that powderiness, but also to some sweetness. There's also some warmth from some ginger and also a little bit of smokiness from some guaiac wood in the mid. And then it goes into a warmer kind of cedar in the dry down. This one wasn't really for me. I feel like I've got better suede fragrances already in my collection. I didn't feel like this one really worked for me. There was quite a lot going on and it just felt like it was a bit confused for me. So that's Island Lush. So the next fragrance is called Purple Suede, and this is a leathery, sweet, slightly incensey oud to begin with to me. But the thing that really stood out for me was that it's got something that I've smelt in another fragrance in this fragrance, and that smell really dominates for me. But just because it's so distinctive, I really feel like if you haven't smelt it before, you might not notice it, but to me it really stood out. So this thing that stood out is called hyssop. I don't actually know how to pronounce it. It's some kind of medicinal smelling flower, but to me it smells sort of partially like a kind of dry mint, but then also it smells like something very sweet and powdery. So it almost smells like pollen coated in shortbread biscuits, sort of made powdery. That sounds really weird, but it's got this kind of texture to it and it's sweet, but it's also a little bit aromatic as well. And the other fragrance I've smelled that in is One Way Bridge's Forgotten Highway, where it's very much more distinctive, and it's also used with lavender. So I saw a lot of parallels between that fragrance and this fragrance. Although they do go in different directions, they do have some similarities. Anyway, this dries down into a more powdery, warm and ambery suede, but still with that mild hyssop touch. And that aromatic and sweet powdery feel to this really makes this very distinctive. The patchouli here makes me think of fragrances like Gucci Guilty Absolute Pour Homme. It's that kind of slightly dank feeling patchouli, that really sort of deep, woody, dry patchouli that's kind of got a bit of a green tinge to it, a green leatheriness about it. But definitely it's not as dark and foreboding as that fragrance is. I quite like this one. I feel like I'd love to smell this on someone else. I don't feel like this one's me, but I think this is a really distinctive fragrance, and I think that it's a nice one. I think it's nicely done. I really love the hyssop in this fragrance. I found this one to be quite long lasting and to project quite well as well. So that's Purple Suede. Next up is one of their most famous fragrances, I think. It's Silky Woods. So Silky Woods is a very sweet fragrance to me. It's a caramelized kind of vanillic saffron based fragrance. Saffron here is something that is not too much for me. I don't really enjoy saffron in fragrances, and here it's quite mild, but it is definitely present, and that really gives this fragrance a bit of an edge. If I didn't know better from the notes of this fragrance, I would really guess there was some kind of amberwood here. It's not quite fizzy, but there's some kind of woodiness, and there's also the warmth to the fragrance as well. Amberwood is something that I generally struggle with, and I see parallels of this fragrance with other fragrances that I've actually ended up decluttering. So things that other people seem to love, like Mercedes Club Black, which I find a little bit synthetic smelling. And then there's also Amir Al Oud by Lattafa. That fragrance is definitely on the leathery side, but it definitely also has a sweet vanillic feel that is similar to Silky Woods, I guess. And also a bit of a texture to it. I think that fragrance has a kind of sugary nuttiness, and Silky Woods also has a kind of boozy, almost nutty feel to it, but really it's more about the golden vanilla, really. I can see why Silky Woods was successful, because it is very vanillic and people just love vanilla. And it's that kind of caramelised vanilla that I think people just really absolutely adore in fragrances. It's generally not something that I love, so this one probably isn't for me. And also on my skin, I found this one to be very short lasting, but I know that's not other people's experience with this fragrance. I think it's generally known to be a beast, but it just isn't on me. It's sort of gone within a couple of hours. So maybe I'm anosmic to aspects of this fragrance and I just stopped smelling it. I'm really not sure. So that's Silky Woods. So the next fragrance is called Silky Woods and Elixir, and this is really a flanker of Silky Woods, but it's very different in feel to me. So this is initially very boozy, and it's also very dark feeling. It's a dark leathery version of Silky Woods, really. It's a little smoky too, but really it's mainly sort of camphoraceous. It smells menthol-like and almost minty, actually. And that mintiness or menthol aspect to this really hangs around, and I figure that that's some kind of part of one of the balsams that's used here, but it's very, very distinctive, and I think that could be very off-putting to a lot of people. And I think that really is the aspect that differentiates this fragrance from Silky Woods. Silky Woods is very light, very vanillic, very easy. This one is very much darker, more treacle-like. In actual fact, in the beginning of this fragrance and even in the middle of the fragrance, I kind of got a bit of a vibe of something like Kayali's Sugared Patchouli, but that really faded towards the dry down. There's sort of an oudiness about this, but it's not quite oud. It's not quite as serious as oud. It's not quite as warm and fuzzy and enveloping as oud. It's more of the dark, leathery feel of this fragrance that's the most distinctive thing, along with that menthol edge. I can kind of see how this is a flanker of Silky Woods, but I really do think they're very different fragrances. And I think if you like Silky Woods, you're not necessarily going to like Silky Woods Elixir, and vice versa. I think these could have very different audiences. This one was really long lasting on me, and very, very much more long lasting and very much more projecting than Silky Woods original was. I think this one's quite punchy. And I think it's quite dark. It makes me actually think of someone dressed in biker leathers. It's a very serious kind of gothic feeling fragrance, this one. So that's Silky Woods Elixir. So the most recent release from Goldfield and Banks is called Mystic Bliss. And this is a very clean, herbal feeling fig fragrance with a slight powderiness. So this has really interesting touches that make me think of different kind of landscapes. It makes me think of a pine forest. It makes me think of a sea or an ocean. And it also makes me think of the dry vegetation around a sea or an ocean. So this opens with a very distinctive kind of green feeling. And the green feeling is quite foresty, so it's got pine forest kind of feel. But there's also some cassis here. So it does have this deep fruitiness, this deep dark purple fruitiness. But that deep fruitiness is hidden and muffled by green leaves almost. And I really like that aspect of the fragrance. That's really the nicest part for me. There's also some fig here, and that grows as the fragrance dries down. So the fig sort of turns ever more green and kind of creamy, but not really milky. It's more of like the actual fruit. I wouldn't ever say this is a syrupy fig fragrance. It's more of a fresher green fig fragrance. Also, as this dries down, there's sort of an aquatic vibe to this almost. It almost smells a bit ocean fresh almost. There's definitely a slight herbal aspect to this, but it's more part of the pine forest kind of feel, which does fade into the dry down. You also get some more texture. There's sort of a powderiness as this dries down, which muffles the fig slightly. I quite like this one. I do have already a green fig fragrance in my collection, but I think if you like fragrances like Charlotte Tilbury Magic Energy or Hydra Fig by Miller Harris, you might really like this one. It's not the same as either of those fragrances, but it's the same kind of play off between something greener and something more aquatic feeling. So that's Mystic Bliss. So in summary, I feel like smelling all these fragrances from Goldfield and Banks has really given me an idea of their house style, and I feel like their house style is very hinged around herbal notes and botanicals. So I feel like there's a lot of use of lavender, a lot of use of menthol kind of style, camphoraceous notes, mint, and also things like ginger. And I think that really gives their fragrances a bit of an edge and makes them smell very different to other things you might smell on the market. I do think they also use a lot of synthetic woods, and I think that to a certain degree puts me off. I've also noticed they do use some ambroxan in some of their fragrances, but that really is in keeping when they use the ambroxan with the style of the fragrance that they're aiming for. So in a way, I'm kind of okay with that. I think Goldfield and Banks, the thing that shocked me was that there was such a range of the lasting power that I got on my skin of the fragrances that I tried. And I just was a little bit unimpressed by how long some of these lasted. So given that, I'm just going to rank the fragrances in my order of preference. And of course, you know, this is based pretty much solely on what I like in fragrance. So this might not be your order, but I just thought it might be interesting to hear how I would rank these fragrances. So number 15, I'm going to put as White Sandalwood. No surprises there. That one I just really didn't get on with. It made me think of cough syrup, cough sweets, furniture polish. It just wasn't pleasant for me. And whilst that powdery white chocolate feel at the beginning was interesting, the rest of it was just a bit weird. So that's White Sandalwood in 15th position. Number 14, I'm going to put Pacific Rock Moss. It's just not my scent category, and it just didn't really do it for me. Number 13 is Blue Cypress. It was just too green, too oceanic for me. It just isn't my scent category, and I'm putting it higher than Pacific Rock Moss because it seemed to last longer on my skin. So yeah, that's Blue Cypress in 13th position. Number 12 is going to be Wood Infusion. It just didn't attract me. I like the opening of it, I like the fluffiness of it, but the dry down just wasn't so much for me. Number 11 is going to be Island Lush. Again, I've just got nicer suede fragrances in my collection already. I don't really see a need for this one in my life. I'm not a big fan of ginger in fragrances, and I think this one just wasn't for me. Number 10, I'm going to very controversially put as Silky Woods. I just don't like saffron, and I don't like that kind of caramelised vanilla in fragrances. It's that kind of light, fake caramel vanilla, and that's just not for me. So that's why that one's low, but I know that a lot of people love that DNA, and that's probably going to rank a lot higher on a lot of other people's lists. So Silky Woods is at number 10. Number 9 is Silky Woods Elixir. I liked the fact that this was darker. I like the added interest of the herbal notes. I can totally see why people wouldn't like this one, but I just felt like it hung around a little bit better. It had a better longevity than Silky Woods, and I liked that kind of treacly darkness that it has. Number 8, I'm going to put in as Bohemian Lime. So I really like the opening of Bohemian Lime. I like the brightness and the summeriness of it, but it really dried down to something that I liked less and less. It basically turned into a men's shower gel. But I would really like to smell this one on someone else. I really feel like it would make someone smell very fresh and very clean. So that's Bohemian Lime at number 8. Number 7 might be a bit surprising considering that I didn't really like this one, but this one is Ingenious Ginger, and the reason I'm putting it at number 7 is because I think it's inventive. I like the fact that the ginger isn't too zingy and sharp. It's very creamy overall, and yeah, I just think it's a good one. So 7 is Ingenious Ginger. 6 is Purple Suede, and that's purely swung, I think, by the hyssop in that fragrance. I really love that kind of sweet, powdery feel to the fragrance, but also those herbal notes. Yeah, just a really nice powdery suede fragrance, but with a kind of touch of Gucci Guilty Absolute almost. Interesting, just not for me. Number 5 I'm going to put as Mystic Bliss. I like the play-off between the foresty, piney, cassis kind of elements with the fig. I think that's really interesting, and I can see that one being a love for some people. So that's Mystic Bliss. Number 4, I'm going to be controversial. I'm going to put Velvet Splendour. I feel like they're ripping off Chanel fragrances slightly with this one, but I do like the modern take on it, and I do like the tropical edge to these fragrances, and I do always like mimosa and fragrances. So I think that's why this one wins here. So yeah, it's Velvet Splendour for number 4. Number 3, I'm going to put as Sunset Hour, because I feel like it has that kind of brightness. It's just got this tropical feel to it again, which I really like, but it is also quite simplistic feeling. And I think the only thing that saves it is really the powderiness and the texture to that fragrance. And I don't think it's something that I would buy, but I can see why people would love it. So that's Sunset Hour, number 3. Number 2 I really liked, and that was Desert Rosewood. I just really like that kind of feeling of being by the fireside. I like that glowy kind of feel that you got with that fragrance. And I just really like the ambery, warm vanilla that you have in that fragrance as well. Really distinctive, nicely done, and I would really recommend Desert Rosewood. Number 1, no surprises for someone who loves solar florals, it's Southern Bloom. So this one just felt very tropical, but also very heady. I think I still do prefer Velvet Orchid. I think it's a bit more complex and an interesting fragrance, but I think this was a good attempt. I think overall, number 2 and number 1 are quite level pegging, but I feel like Southern Bloom just has a little bit more complexity to it compared with number 2. But number 2 is done very well. Desert Rosewood is done very well. But yeah, those top 2 are my recommendations really. So thank you so much for watching. If you have enjoyed the video, then please press the like button, and please also consider subscribing if you haven't done already. And please let me know, do you own any fragrances from Goldfield and Banks? Which are your favourite Goldfield and Banks fragrances? Do you particularly hate any Goldfield and Banks fragrances? I'd be really interested to know what your opinions are on the brand as well. So thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.